Greetings, it's Max, and we're back, and today we're going to answer questions. Yes, yes, yes. Question came in by C-L-N-E regarding Old Testament and works for salvation. So we're going to cover it here. The question is, in the Old Testament, didn't the high priest need to cover his sins by sacrificing an animal prior to entering the Holy of Holies? Yes, that is generally the way that, from what I read, that it works. The high priest would cleanse themselves along with, in the case of in Leviticus, it was Aaron and his sons, and they would do their thing before they were considered cleansed and holy to do sacrifices for everyone else, which again, the Jews, the works couldn't be saving them there because the Jews en masse as a nation were hoping that the Levitical Jews were doing their job correctly. They brought the offering, but it was the priests themselves that went and did the ceremony for them on their behalf. So they had to have faith in God and in their brother Levites. Wouldn't he be struck dead if he didn't do everything perfectly? Yes, and Leviticus 10 verses 1 through 3. This is Aaron's sons, and they messed up. Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them as his censer and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered the strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out a fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said unto Aaron, This is it that the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh to me, and before all people I will be glorified. And Aaron didn't say anything. So yes, that is a thing. Isn't that what all Jews were required to do to be saved? If you're referring to the animal sacrifices, no. The animal sacrifices were for blessings and curses. It was also a covering of their sin, because the Jews were really, really messed up into it all the time. Even with God dwelling with them, they still had problems. And the animal sacrifices had, a deterrent effect and a reminder effect that you need to kill all these innocent creatures because you're such terrible people. And it was a covering for their sins so that God would talk to them, sort of like a more or less a fellowship. But it was a covenant arrangement that was made, goes all the way back through Abraham, with God. And those sacrifices with the blood as a covering, you can think of it like this. You think of it like you took out a huge loan that you can't afford to pay back at all, and you lost your job or something. Doesn't matter, any amount of money, wherever your situation is, and there's no way in your lifetime you can see how you can pay it back, right? But what you can do is maybe pay interest. And you get in touch with them, and they allow you to pay just the interest for the rest of your life, because that's all you can do. Otherwise, they'll kill you. Okay? That's what the Jews have going on, is they're just paying interest on their debt, their sin debt, until Jesus Christ came and washed their debt away. That is what it is. Now, were the works for their eternal salvation? No. The works are there for their physical salvation. If they didn't do the work for the sin offering, even in some Gentile places, if they didn't offer a sacrifice to God, God would wipe them out. You have the whole situation with Nineveh and Jonah. So this is a thing. This is a thing in the Old Testament, where if you're unsure of what to do, you offer a sacrifice to God. Now this gets perverted by just about every pagan culture out there with sacrifice. Baal worship was a big deal, and that's where they're offering up children. And where do these sacrifices and things come from is, if you're not worshiping the true God, you will find a God to worship, because there are things that are out of your control. You're not getting any rain. Well, somebody must be in charge of the rain, so we'll make up a God and we'll sacrifice to it to try and get our rain going again, because there's nothing you can do about it. It's out of your hands. And people need something outside of themselves that they can direct that, despair or whatever you call it, something that's out of your hands. And if they don't have the real God, then they have a fake one. And if the real God is demanding, lambs and doves and things like that for an offering, you go, well, offering up children, a person is above animals on the scale, so that should really get us blessings. So that whole system of sacrifice gets perverted in that way. Now, the sacrifices save them? No. They covered their sins. Sort of like another analogy would be, you've got a whole bunch of dirt in your house and your floor. Okay? You sweep it all up into a nice little pile and you cover them with a rug. The dirt's not gone, but you can't see it. Okay? And then Jesus comes in with a vacuum cleaner and gets rid of it. This is how things, very basic analogies there. So, the next question here. Were they required to be saved? Shed the blood of a unblemished free animal to atone for their sins. Yes, I just covered that. It was a covering for their sins. The Old Testament to me was not grace through faith alone. Well, it was faith alone as far as your salvation goes. And that is, of course, by grace, although it doesn't appear that way. But you have to also remember that the Jews have special requirements because of their covenant with Abraham. Abraham, if you want to look at them being the least people, Abraham is a guy who couldn't have offspring. So how big of a people is he? It's him and his wife. That's how big of a people he is, a great nation. Okay? He took a guy and his wife and made the entire nation of Israel, all the Hebrews. So when you look at how that is with grace through faith alone, yeah, they're very much so blessed based on what they do. And Abraham, according to the Bible, was entirely saved by faith. Next one, even the early church was required to have faith in Jesus and then get baptized. They weren't required to be baptized. Baptism is a symbol that John the Baptist, so the name comes from, was showing people the death, burial, and resurrection through washing in the water or dunking in the water, baptism practice, and was setting that up. He says, I'm going to baptize you with water, the one who comes baptized with fire. So this is a symbol. Jesus, of course, was baptized, showing this is what's going to happen. He didn't need to be baptized. He didn't need any symbol of washing of sins because he was sinless. He did that as an example for us to follow. It's a work. And on that note, if you ask somebody at random if they're going to heaven or not, and they come back with, well, I was baptized when I was a kid, does that mean that they're going to heaven? No, baptism is a work. You ask them, well, do you believe in Jesus? And they go, well, I don't know. They're on their way to hell. It's that simple. Baptism has nothing to do with it. And as far as whether or not you have your baptism was required for the Jews, no. It was a symbol that they did, and you have the transition of the Gentiles eliminated baptism. Well, you still have baptism today. It's used as a symbol of your outward faith towards people, saying, I am a Christian. I put my faith in Jesus. And it is still encouraged. I think a lot of the reasons that people don't get baptized today is because they don't have a home church. And you like to, for a proper baptism, you like to have a pastor guy and with a church and a congregation where everyone claps and everyone's all happy, I mean, you can do a baptism now with another saved person can dunk you under the water, but it's just not the same thing, so how it is. And as far as people being baptized, you have the Ethiopian eunuch was baptized before the Holy Ghost came and all of that. So, yeah. Transition to the Gentiles eliminated baptism? No. Resulting in simple grace through faith message. See, the thing is that that's the message. Now, the reason we don't believe in dispensational salvation is because we don't believe that God changes. What changes is what God reveals to man and how he deals with them over time. But God does not change. In reality, it has always been grace through faith. The message wasn't made clear until it went to the Gentiles because the Gentiles knew nothing about the true God. But it's always been there. And Paul in Hebrews says that very, very plainly. He goes through the whole list of people, all justified by faith. These differences were put in place for a reason. The reason that you see a lot of differences is because, number one, the Bible is a Jewish book. Everybody in there is a Jew. It's right in the Bible. And it's covering their history and their walk with God and their covenants. And because of their covenants, they were blessed and they were cursed. 400 years. They were the best friends with Egypt, by the way. They were the best friends with Egypt. And they ended up being enslaved by Egypt because they didn't move away and weren't doing what God wanted them to do for a very long time. And then when they came out of that, then they got Moses, and then they have all these laws. Before that, they didn't have that. These are special things that are for the Jews, and they didn't have to do them. They were voluntary setup. If they didn't want to do the Jewish traditions, and they didn't want to do the animal sacrifices, they wanted to work on Saturday, or they wanted to do these things, they did not have to live there. They weren't forced to be there. I don't know where else you'd want to be when you have God as a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of smoke during the day. He's right there. Why wouldn't you want to be there? So that's what's going on. It's a completely different deal as far as what's revealed to the people, and realize that these are special people with special requirements. The covenant that I have with God right now is I have faith and trust in Jesus Christ's death, burial, resurrection on the cross, and my sins will be forgiven. That's the covenant that we got. The covenant is the same to the Jews. But they might also have some other things in there for blessings and curses. Right now, they have their own land back. Now, what's involved in that? Are they still, the Saturday thing where they're supposed to have Saturdays off and not do any work on Saturday, that was an everlasting covenant. Should they still be doing that? Probably. There are things like that don't apply to Gentiles today, but it has nothing to do with salvation. It has to do with contracts that were set up between these people and us. So I hope we have that. As far as the reasons for the sacrifices, I have Leviticus 9:6, and Moses said, "This is the thing which the Lord commanded ye should do, and the glory of God shall appear unto you." Got to have them sins covered. Leviticus 17:11, "For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul." So people will take that and say they have it's required to be saved in the Old Testament for the Jews to do these sacrifices and things. Well, they probably weren't sacrificing a lot when they were enslaved for 400 years. So I guess all those people get to go to hell for just because they were enslaved. You have people in the line of Jesus who are Gentiles who weren't following all of this stuff. Saved people. You have a lot of examples of that. So this atonement for the soul is, like I said, paying interest on a loan that you cannot pay off ever in your lifetime. And the sentence for not paying anything is death. And like in the Jews' case, if they didn't do those sacrifices and they don't do those things that make God happy, they get themselves in a lot of trouble. They got themselves in trouble right away after coming out of Egypt by making a golden calf, to the point that God was ticked off enough that he made them wander around in circles in the desert for 40 years. So you got your blessings and you got your curses. You got to do the stuff. And the faith involved there was that they don't have faith that God exists because they can see him. They have faith that God is going to do what God promised, what Moses told the people through Aaron, what was going to happen. That's where their faith lies in. And gradually, of course, then their faith also comes to, we're going to have our great promised land, which they eventually made it to. And then it was starting into the promised Messiah. So that's what's going on there. And then I think this is Leviticus 11 again. It is. So I hope that answers your question, relating back to what the priests had to do in the Old Testament, what the works and the sacrifices were actually for in the Old Testament, and clearing up any ideas that there's any works involved at all in having to do with your spiritual salvation. I will agree, the Jews have to do their works for physical salvation. And in some cases, even in the early Old Testament in Acts, you have Gentile people who are messing up a little bit, and God struck them dead. Your physical salvation was kind of in jeopardy if you didn't do what God told you. And that's how it was back then. But spiritual, no. And did the Jews go to heaven? No, they went to Abraham's bosom because their debt had still not been paid. So when Jesus died on the cross, those Jews that were counted as righteous ascended into heaven with Jesus. So I think that covers everything and then some. And with that, we'll be out of here.